Hello and welcome back to What Is It About the Weather? I'm your host, Mark Jelanic, and this week we're going to be talking about fish and weather, or more specifically, fishing and weather. Now, since we spoke last, I've certainly had some interesting weather, and I hope you have as well, but as always, I hope it's been safe for you. Now, since we last talked, there's been a sad occasion in the weather enterprise. Dave Schwartz, a longtime meteorologist for the Weather Channel, passed away after a battle with cancer, and he's had numerous over the past 10 years or so. And unfortunately, he did not win this last battle. And he leaves behind quite a legacy in terms of just being one of those people, as a meteorologist, that people enjoyed watching and felt a real connection with. He was a super nice guy and genuinely enjoyed what he did for a living and felt lucky to do that. So certainly our thoughts and prayers go out to his family and his loved ones, and peace be with you, Dave, wherever you may be. So Weather Channel is also in the midst of their photo contest for 2016. Submission deadline has passed, but you can vote, and that's why I bring it up now. So fan favorites, get out there and vote. Of course, as with all this stuff, there'll be a link in the show notes, so you can go vote for your favorites. And lastly, I was originally, going to do kind of a weather and animal episode, kind of a broad one. And even as I started looking at it and doing the research on this episode, I realized I'm going to have to do weather and specific animals or species at a minimum, because there's just so much to cover. But I wanted to take a moment to remind folks during this hot summer to keep an eye on your pets. Don't walk them on hot asphalt. Make sure they've got water and shade if you've got to leave them during the day. Don't leave them in a hot car, people. Think about these things. It's just, again, it's common sense, but remember your common sense and think about your pets as well. They can't roll down the windows. Well, there probably are some that can. They can't turn on the water spigot and get themselves water. They can't always find shade if it's not made available to them. I mean, they'll seek it out when they need it. So just think about your pets. But let's move on to the main topic for today. And like I said, it kind of started with a weather and animals, and then I had a suggestion from Kathy, and thank you for that, about more doing a weather and fish. And it kind of hit home with me because I grew up fishing, and I still love to fish. I've find that I guess my favorite stuff now is going up in the mountains and kind of getting away and doing stream fishing. But I'm not alone. There are millions across the country that enjoy fishing, and so weather and fishing and the best time to fish, of course, has been a topic of much conversation. And I just completely forgot. I had not been on the internet looking for fishing-related items in a while. I had forgotten how many fish forums there are and that kind of stuff. And so this topic, of course, had a lot of chatter on it. And weather and fishing in general, understanding when to best catch the fish is certainly important for a lot of people. And it's not a new topic by any means. There's a lot of people about whether it's a cloudy day, sunny day, and all that kind of stuff. And some of it makes logical sense when you're thinking through it. If it's a really hot day, certainly the water's going to heat up, at least at the high levels of the water, versus maybe a cloudy day or those sort of things. But there's also other things. So like solar lunar. I hope I'm saying that. So lunar theory, excuse me, not solar lunar. So lunar theory has to do with tides and sunrise and sunset, and moonrise and moonset, and even phases of the moon. And the idea there is, kind of predicting what setup is most optimal for fishing. And you'll see these forecasts from time to time on weather stations. They're still put out there today. And that's all it's really looking at. It's not actually looking at the weather conditions themselves, thinking that, and we do know that tides have a big impact on fishing, especially in the ocean, but it can in all bodies of water. So a topic of much interest, important to like I said, millions of people I know in the U.S. and certainly around the globe. This is, fishing, whether it's a way of life or whether it's a leisurely activity, is done by millions of people, probably billions of people, if we think globally. And people always you don't want to waste your time. I mean, anybody who's ever fished knows that there's good days and bad days. And if you're going out with the intention of catching a meal and you come home with nothing, you're going to feel like, well, I could have done something else that was a better use of my time. So let's dig into the science a little bit. And, I mentioned things like wind and cloud cover and all those sort of things that people kind of understand that there are connections with, will the fish hide? Will they be in cover? Are they more likely to be out, actively feeding? And again, times of day as well, sunrise, sunset, different times of the day that, are just kind of what we would consider normal active fishing times or active fish biting time sort of thing. Now, the one item that seemed to bring up the most debate about uncertainty was barometric pressure and its connection to fish or fishing. And again, like I said, I'd heard about this in the past, and I'd seen different theories thrown forward, but I was amazed when I was reading all this stuff. This was one of those investigations that both had me laughing and crying at the same time with some of the stuff I was reading and people talking about stuff and people thinking that the same condition in a fish would cause two opposite feelings. So, there's all sorts of theories bound about. But let's hit the science, the science that we really know first. And let me step back and do a little bit of explanation. So barometric pressure is a term that you may have heard before, but it's a measurement of air pressure that we feel. And we've discussed this in some previous episodes. And I tend to measure it in millibars. That's kind of the standard scientific way. You'll also see it measured in inches of mercury, and that's a real common way that people know it. And it has to do with original barometers, and it was a measurement of how much pressure was pushing the mercury in the device to a certain level, much like a standard thermometer would work or anything like that. So the idea of fluid pressure, though, or hydrostatic pressure, is very different, as we know, in the air and water. And anybody that's ever, even going down to the bottom of a pool, a deep pool, or if you've been underwater before, you kind of feel that, or it's kind of like going up in an airplane. It feels very different on your head, and that's particularly where you notice it with your ears and your sinuses, etc. And think about it the same way. You can go down 10 feet and feel it in water versus going up in an airplane to feel it in the air. And it really is that different. So most changes in atmospheric pressure from what would be considered a high measurement in the air to an extremely low measurement, like a hurricane passing through, almost all of that, and I'm not talking necessarily the extremes, would be felt in the equivalent of about 1 meter or 3 feet of water. So those changes is about the equivalent of going 3 feet in the water. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And that's why generally we don't feel it on a regular basis. Now there's two kind of major scientific impacts that go on with pressure in water. The first has to do with pressure can indeed change the water level. And it seems logical enough, right? If you've got low pressure, there's not as much force coming down on that water surface, and it can raise the water a little bit. Now, that's going to be maybe more noticeable in a small body of water versus a large body of water, where, again, tides are going to have more impact than this sort of thing. And again, the changes in pressure tend to be more localized, so it's not like you're going to have that widespread thing. But like we talked about with earthquakes, right, you can sense that there is actually maybe a release of that downward pressure when you have a low-pressure system moving through. But probably the more important thing is the level of gas that's dissolved in water. And I'll use soda as an example. So when you think of a bottled soda, right, and you uncork that thing, all of a sudden, all that pressure releases, right? So all that gas escapes the water. And so it leaves, it goes in the air. It's no longer dissolved in water. So it does have a big impact on the amount of stuff dissolving in water. So scientifically, those are probably the most, directly on the water itself are probably the things to keep in mind. Now, when you look at the people that argue that barometric pressure definitively impacts fish, they're looking at a couple of different things. Probably three things came up again and again. One is the impact on the air bladders. And many of you may know that many fish have an air bladder that expands or contracts as fish go up and down in water. It helps them with their buoyancy. It helps them with dealing with those pressure changes, right? So the idea again is that animals are more sensitive, and so even though it is in the water, and as we discussed that, those big pressure changes are only like moving up and down a couple of feet. The idea would be is if a fish is used to a certain thing at a certain time of day or in certain weather conditions, that bladder is going to change, right? It's going to be, it may be a small change, but maybe the fish are really attuned to that, okay? And then lastly is experience. Like I said, they've gone out and they fished on certain types of weather, and they find that when the barometric pressure is dropping or rising, this is part of the challenging thing, that's when it's best to fish. Okay, so that's the argument for in terms of the basis of where they're coming from. The argument against, well, one, fish just aren't that sensitive. Again, if their bladder was that sensitive, they'd go nuts every time they moved up and down a few feet. More likely that the barometric pressure, it's the weather changes that it's bringing on. Again, let's talk about a low pressure system moving through, a shift in winds, more clouds, less sunshine. So all those things are going to impact the water environment. That there's no real research to prove it. And lastly, their experience of fishing many times has shown, and they've recorded it, has shown they get good action no matter what the weather is or what the atmospheric pressure specifically is going around. Now, so you can see we're setting up for quite a different belief in both things. And I heard credible arguments from people that work for departments of natural resource, actual meteorologists who are for it, and the same against it. What was really particularly funny is there's a web magazine, and I believe they have a print magazine as well, called In-Fisherman. And within their own website, they had experts say yes and no. So even they were contradicting themselves in what they were putting forward. Now, in one of the real challenges I had was actually finding real research. And the people that were for barometric pressure, atmospheric pressure having an impact on fish would even say that there's not a lot of research, or what, and it is important to keep in mind, there's a lot of research that's done that's never published, right? That's done at a Department of Natural Resources or a Game and Fish Division, those sort of things. And so that a lot of times was the research they were referring to, the experts in those areas. Whereas the little bit of research I did find, kind of a pro and against, one showed with perch that there was absolutely no difference. And another one talked about sharks and some hurricanes coming in. And, one of the challenges I always have is they went with there didn't seem to be another logical explanation, but I haven't seen any follow-up on that proved it, right? And again, this is kind of what I look for. You look for an evolution. And so they were saying, well, we couldn't find evidence of another atmospheric condition that was causing the change. Well, again, this gets into, is the barometric pressure really at cause, or is that causing different things? Like I talked about this dissolving in gas, and I think even the people I talk to, we'll jump a little bit into my personal take here is, scientifically, this all seems feasible, right? You can imagine, again, maybe the fish is more sensitive, or I think if there really is a connection, it's more likely with two things. I do think that to the people who vote against it, right, that my tendency is to agree with them in that it's more likely the weather changes that come about with changing atmospheric pressure that would lead to behavioral changes in the fish. But if there is that connection, I think more likely it is the impact on gases and pressure, and even releasing in the low end of the food chain. And let's all keep in mind, big things eat little things that eat littler things that eat littler things, etc. And it's at the bottom of that food chain in the biology where, I talked about the gas releases, and even, thinking of low pressure as releasing gas from the bottom of a shallow lake, right? And allowing that whole release to take place. And you've maybe even seen this before. You've been walking around, and it's not necessarily a fish or a turtle or other things that might release gas, but occasionally if some weather's coming through, you'll see that there's more activity in the water in terms of small things being released. And maybe you haven't seen it if you don't get out and do these sort of things, but you can take my word for it. So lower pressure does allow maybe some gases that are trapped near the bottom of a lake from decomposing matter or anything like that to release, right? So my take is, do I think there's a real connection? Do I think the fish are that sensitive? I think fish would go crazy if they were that sensitive to it. But, that's just me speaking. I do think that if there really is a connection, it's more likely at a microscopic or a very small creature level, changing things in the food chain. So encouraging behaviors that might not be there otherwise. And I do think that there really is a broader connection to weather. So some couple of good links. The articles I got, and just so you know, for most of you, if you have a local library, make sure you join it. There's a lot of these. I can't share the articles with you from a copyright standpoint, but if you have a local library and they have these online systems, like I know in the state of Georgia, we have one called Galileo that gave me access to these articles. So if you're interested in the articles, I can give you the name and you might be able to get them. But take advantage of your local library. You'd be surprised at the amount of online resources that are available to you to leverage in these types of things. But again, weather certainly impacts fishing. Whether barometric pressure is a direct thing, I would call me skeptical. And that's one of the great things about being in this field, right, is being a scientist, you're encouraged to be a skeptic. And my skeptic meter went way off on the arguments because it didn't really make the link between cause and effect. It made the link of, well, because I couldn't find a better answer. So I know that studying fish is not the easiest thing in the world. And, the other thing that you find with research is one of the biggest things you don't find in research is what we didn't find, but that's equally as important. And I found that in doing my research work and getting my degree is it's the things that you say, well, there's no relationship here that you never hear about in the literature, but is actually very important. My speculation is a lot of people have done a lot of studies, and in the end of the day, the research hasn't borne out anything. And so, nobody, even in research, you kind of got to make headlines. No one likes that sort of thing. You want to find the aha or the what is the real relationship kind of stuff. So whether you're for or against it, right? The reality probably is you believe what you believe, and maybe even fish a certain way. So maybe a certain type of day is better suited to the way you fish. Because sure, there may be a connection in, fish tend to hide under cover when, there's more sun out. It seems logical enough. But a lot of this stuff, it's all hard to prove. And, what certain people will tell you is you just need to be more attuned to how the fish are feeding, because hungry fish are going to eat. At the end of the day. But probably the best thing I heard in all this and looking at all of it was the only bad weather for fishing is the weather that keeps you from being able to fish. So I think that applies to most of life. So the only bad weather is the weather that keeps you from being able to do the thing you want to do. So whether that's fishing or some other activity, just remember that end of the day, you're out there to enjoy yourself, hopefully. And for those of you who make a living at it, you've probably figured out how to catch fish in any type of weather conditions. And that has probably paid off for you, and you aren't as caught up in these debates. But if you really want to have some good laughs, go out and type in atmospheric pressure and fish and see what comes up in your Google. And I swear I saw articles where in the same article, the same person was quoted, the same expert was quoted, in proving and disproving the concept that they were trying to prove. So you will enjoy it for some good laughs if you want to get out there and do it. So in any case, end of day, I'm not sure there's a connection. Like I said, label me a skeptic on this one. And I'd like to think there is. I always think it's neat when we understand these things a little more. But what I do know is the research is not solid enough to suggest there's any sort of connection there. And the links I'll put in the show notes you can read and you can decide. Because I am going to give you arguments both for and against. You can decide whether you think the connection is there or not. And I did try to pick, like I said, the most credible, well-written stories as opposed to some of the forum stuff I read. So now let's move on to the interesting tidbit for this week. And it does also have to do with animals. and it has to do with cow farts. You heard it, cow farts. So when I was looking at, like I said, doing a weather and animals thing, I was going to look at just general impacts of weather and animals. And cows were one of the other things that came up quite a bit. Now, I have no desire to do a whole podcast on cows and weather, but I will tell you that there were some funny reads and some interesting reads scientifically. And this is the walkaway is cows, for instance, in the U.S., produce approximately 20% of the methane emissions. Now, methane is an important, what we would call a greenhouse gas that has to do with the way the Earth heat balances itself, right? And methane is, you'll hear about it, but a lot of times you don't. But it's a very impactful gas, much more so than even carbon dioxide. It's just we don't have as much methane so you don't always hear about it, but it has a much larger influence on heat in the planet. And cows produce 20% of it roughly. So just keep that in mind when you're out there thinking about cows. And yes, we know they all have gas and they have manure, and all that stuff contributes to your weather. So next time we're going to touch on lightning. Actually, our next vidcast coming next week, and whether it comes up or goes down. You might be surprised. And I think for the next audio podcast, we're going to get back into another history and did weather change history topic for the other audio podcast this month. Now, with all this fishing stuff, I'd love to hear your weather and fishing advice. I will say that one of the things that was definitively clear is every species is different. And even whether you do ocean fishing or freshwater fishing or ice fishing or whatever it might be, that weather's impact on all these sort of things is different. And I would probably recommend making sure that if you're going fishing in an area you've never fished in before, get some advice, whether it's reading it on a forum or talking to a guide, that sort of thing. The local advice will probably go a long way, more so than the weather, in determining whether you catch fish. Now, as with all things, whether it's a show topic or anything else, feel free to send me feedback. As you know, we're also looking for what are your favorite weather apps feedback. And you can do all that via the web form that's been asked. Just look under Contact Us at whatisitabouttheweather.com, or you can send an email to whatisitabouttheweather@gmail.com. Now, again, I want to thank everybody for the listener growth that we've had. We continue to expand, and it's all been done through, again, we're not doing any advertising or anything like that. It's through your word of mouth and your sharing, and that's just been appreciated. Great. We've added some new countries. We're down to just a few states where we don't have confirmed listeners, so thank you for all that. And don't forget about YouTube. I know a lot of people, I'm going to do a cloud series, I think, that's really not enough. I may do an intro episode in part of the regular series, but probably going to do some informational ones on individual cloud types. So if you don't subscribe to that, feel free. As I mentioned before, you also can get the shorts there that I do from time to time, again, that are just weather events or different things, and you might enjoy it. So go to the website, look on how to connect with us, or even just click the little YouTube icon up there, and you'll find the page, and you can subscribe there. So find us at whatisitabouttheweather.com. All the information is there. Tell people about whatisitabouttheweather.com. And I know the last time I mentioned the new Google album I have for some of the weather photos I take, I forgot to put the link in the show notes last time. I will make sure to do it this time. So again, for those of you not following me on Twitter or Instagram, where you get most of these, if you just enjoy time to time seeing some weather pics, that Google weather album is one that I'm putting up there. Now, let me remind you, as always, RSVP, rate. Take a moment, rate us on iTunes or whatever podcasting service or aggregator you might use. It goes a long way. As they will tell you, most things, the stars matter. I like actually reading what you have to say. So take a moment and rate us, share, Tell others about us. Like I said, that's how we're growing, and the growth continues, and I'm very thankful for that. But it is through you taking the time to say, hey, have you heard this or listened to this or seen it? Validate, give us your feedback. Let us know if you think I'm nuts for what I'm talking about. If you like it, if there's episodes you want to hear. I mean, again, we're getting more and more to the point where a lot of times something may have been on my brain, but you may turn it in a way, like Kathy did this week, to help me hone in on a specific topic instead of feeling lost in what to actually talk about. And lastly, pledge. If you're enjoying what you're hearing and you want to support us, you can do that currently on Patreon. I hope to get a few merchandising items up soon. It's taken, as with a lot of things, sometimes it takes longer to make it happen, mostly due to the quality of what I've seen so far. But until next time, may you have exciting, enjoyable, pleasurable, whatever type of weather you like, but may it always be safe.